The 2026 World Cup is about to be watched by more Americans than any soccer tournament in history, and most of them couldn't tell you a single rule of the offside trap. So, what's actually going on here? Because here's the thing, the US has hosted a World Cup before, 1984, and while that tournament was generally massive, it didn't really convert America into a soccer nation. People watched, they enjoyed, and they went back to football and baseball. But 2026 feels different, and I want to show you exactly why. Because it's not just hype. This tournament is structurally, historically, and logistically unlike anything that's ever been attempted before. I've gone through over a century of World Cup history to pull out the moments and facts that make 2026 genuinely unprecedented. And by the end of this video, I think you understand why even the most casual fan should have this one on the radar. We're going to go through some of the wildest quirks from World Cup history, show you how 2026 compares, and then land on the one thing about this tournament that almost nobody's talking about, and it might be the biggest deal of all. Let's start with something that sounds almost too chaotic to be true. The very first World Cup, Uruguay 1930, didn't open with one ceremony match. It opened with two simultaneously. France versus Mexico and USA versus Belgium kick off at the exact same time on July 13, 1930. No coordinated broadcast, no global audience, no singular moment. Just two games happening at once because nobody had figured it out yet that the opening was supposed to mean something. Fast forward to 2026 and the tournament opens with a single carefully staged match at the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City, a venue that, by the way, is about to do something no stadium has ever done. Azteca hosted World Cup matches in 1917 and 1986, including Maradona's Hand of God goal and the Argentina versus West Germany final. In 2026, it becomes the first stadium in history to host three separate World Cups. That's not a coincidence. FIFA chose that venue deliberately because they understand that the opening of this tournament needs to feel like an event. A century of trial and error, starting with two simultaneous games in Uruguay, has led to the single choreographed moment in Mexico City. But the opening ceremony isn't even the most interesting structural change in 2026. Not by a long shot. Here's something most casual fans don't realize. The World Cup format has been wildly inconsistent throughout history. The 1934 and 1938 tournaments had no group stage at all. You show up, you play a knockout match, and if you lost, you went home. That was it. And the 1950 World Cup in Brazil, which is famous for Uruguay's shocking upset of the host nation, never even had an official final. It ended with a round-robin group where Uruguay's win over Brazil functioned as the de facto championship match. The whole thing was kind of improvised. 2026 is the opposite of improvised. It's the most structurally complex World Cup ever staged. 48 teams, 12 groups, 104 matches spread across three countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, over 39 days. For context, the current format that most fans are used to involves 32 teams and 64 matches. This tournament is essentially 50% bigger than what we've seen in recent memory, and the organizational challenge of pulling it off across three nations with different time zones, different languages, and different soccer cultures is generally staggering. Which actually brings up one of the funniest stories in World Cup history, and it's relevant to 2026 in a way that might surprise you. When South Korea and Japan co-hosted in 2002, the two countries got into a diplomatic squabble over which language should be used as the official tournament language. South Korea's FIFA vice president pushed for French. not because of any strong cultural connection to French, but because Korea comes before Japan alphabetically, which would put Korea first in all official documentation. And the opening ceremony in Seoul didn't mention Japan at all. These two countries were co-hosting the same tournament and could barely agree on the basics. 2026 is a three-country arrangement, which means the diplomatic choreography involved is even more complex. The US, Canada, and Mexico have their own political tensions, their own priorities, and their own fan bases to serve. Getting all of that to run smoothly is a genuine achievement in itself, separate from anything that happens on the pitch. Now, I mentioned there's one thing about 2026 that almost nobody's talking about, and I'm going to get to that because it generally changes how you should think about this tournament. But first, there are a couple more pieces of history worth knowing. Consider India at the 1950 World Cup. India actually qualified. They were placed in a group with Sweden, Paraguay, and Italy after other nations withdrew. And then they just didn't go. The popular explanation you hear is that FIFA banned them from playing barefoot, but the real reasons were more mundane: funding issues, travel logistics, and the fact that the tournament didn't carry the global prestige it does today. The 1950 World Cup was still a relatively niche event in much of the world. That's almost impossible to imagine now. In 2026, the player pool alone is 1,248 registered players, 48 teams, 26 players each, before you even account for injury replacements. That's more registered players than most domestic leagues carry across an entire season, all converging in one tournament. The scale of what the World Cup has become since India skipped it in 1950 is almost incomprehensible. And some of those players are coming from places that will generally surprise you. Cape Verde, a small island nation off the coast of West Africa with a population of around 550,000 people, has qualified for 2026. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the population of Fresno, California. Cape Verde is the second smallest country ever to qualify for a World Cup, behind only Iceland, which had about 402,000 people when they qualified in 2018. So you got Fresno-sized Cape Verde sharing a tournament with Brazil, Germany, and the United States. That's the kind of thing that makes this sport genuinely interesting. Okay, now let's talk about the thing that makes 2026 actually different from every World Cup that came before it. FIFA is planning a Super Bowl-style halftime show for the final. MetLife Stadium in New Jersey will host the first ever musical performance during halftime of a men's World Cup final. This has never happened before. Entertainment at World Cups has always been confined to pretty much ceremonies or the opening and closing shows. The final itself has always been just soccer. In 2026, that changes. Artists reportedly in discussions include Shakira, Madonna, and BTS. And before you dismiss this is a gimmick, think about what it actually signals. FIFA is explicitly trying to capture the casual American sports fan, the person who watches the Super Bowl for the commercials and the halftime show as much as the game itself. They are engineering this tournament to be a cultural event, not just a sporting one. And that's why the American audience is suddenly paying attention in a way they weren't in 1984. Because in 1884, the World Cup was something happening in America. In 2026, America is being woven into the fabric of the tournament itself. Speaking of 1984, and this is one of my favorite facts in all sports history, the last time the US hosted a World Cup, the opening ceremony happened on the same day as O.J. Simpson's slow-motion Bronco chase across Los Angeles. Inside the stadium, Oprah Winfrey endured her ankle falling off a stage, and Diana Ross, doing a choreographed beat, missed an open goal from 3 yards. 3 yards. The 2026 organizers are very aware of that legacy. You can expect a significantly tighter production this time around. But there's one shadow hanging over 2026 that's worth mentioning honestly, because it's a real concern. Climate scientists have raised serious alarms about the heat conditions the player will face, particularly at outdoor venues during summer months. An open letter coordinated by the New Weather Institute warned that the standard cooling breaks FIFA has planned are, in their words, too short to have a significant impact on rehydration and cooling the body. Experts have pushed FIFA to adopt stricter guidelines from FIFPro, the Global Players Union, but as of now, FIFA hasn't fully complied. The 1994 tournament faced heat issues too, but 2026 is projected to be more dangerous. It's the one area where the organizers haven't clearly learned from history, and it's worth watching. If you're finding this kind of deep dive into sports history interesting, there's a good chance you'll enjoy some of the other videos on the channel that go into similar territory. Drop a comment below with which World Cup fact generally surprised you the most, because I'm curious whether it was the India one, the 1930 double opener, or something else entirely. And if you want to see more of this kind of content, subscribing actually helps more than most people realize. It's how the algorithm figures out to show these videos to people who actually enjoy them. So let's pull all of this together, because there's a real through line here. The World Cup started in 1930 with two simultaneous matches, no real format, and a nation that qualified and didn't bother showing up. It evolved through decades of pure knockout chaos, diplomatic squabbles over alphabetical order, opening ceremonies that competed with card chases, and a 1950 final that wasn't technically a final. Each tournament, for better or worse, taught the organizers something. 2026 is the product of all of that learning. It's the biggest player pool ever assembled, the most structurally complex format ever attempted, the first three-country co-host arrangement, the first World Cup final with a halftime show, and it's all happening in a country where soccer has historically been an afterthought, but where the infrastructure, the stadiums, and the cultural appetite have finally caught up to the moment. The question going into 2026 isn't just who wins, it's whether this is the tournament that finally makes soccer a permanent fixture in American sports culture the way the 1994 Cup never quite managed to, and honestly, given everything built around it, the scale, the spectacle, the deliberate engineering of it as a mainstream event, I think the answer might actually be yes. That's worth paying attention to, even if you never cared about soccer a day in your life.